Kite, and Eric Severide in Washington, Roger Mudd in Washington, Nelson Benton in Pittsburgh, Dan Rather in Indiana, John Lawrence in Panama City, Florida, Philip Scheffler in London, Haywood Hale Broon in St. Louis, and Richard C. Hartlett at the United Nations.
Good evening. Acknowledging defeat in the Senate and appealing that the filibuster not become a precedent in presidential appointments, President Johnson today withdrew his nomination of Abe Fortas as Chief Justice. The President acted at Fortas' request. Roger Mudd reports.
At 11:15 this morning, Justice Abe Fortas yielded to the inevitable. He released his letter to the President asking that his nomination for Chief Justice be withdrawn. He had written the letter in longhand yesterday, soon after the Senate refused to end its filibuster against him. Fortas wrote that further attempts at confirmation would result in a continuation of the attacks upon the court, attacks which have been sometimes extreme and entirely unrelated to responsible criticism. He said he would continue as Associate Justice. About an hour later at the White House, the President accepted the Fortas decision with deep regret. The action of the Senate, said Mr. Johnson, is historically and constitutionally tragic. Later, at a bill signing ceremony, the President went out of his way to praise Chief Justice Earl Warren, who was in the audience.
Above all, I want to pay my very special thanks to our beloved Chief Justice, who stands for all that's good in this country.
Warren, whose conditional retirement stimulated much of the opposition to Fortas, declined to answer reporters' questions about how much longer he would remain on the court. But because three other justices, Black, Douglas, and Harlan, may retire next year, there is speculation Warren might want to wait until the makeup of the court is clear. In the Senate today, the reaction generally was sympathetic to Fortas' predicament, said opposition leader Republican Robert Griffin of Michigan.
I believe that any Chief Justice of the United States should have widespread support among the people and within the Senate of the United States. In view of the deep division and the controversy which has surrounded this nomination, I think Mr. Fortas' action was very wise.
Democrat Philip Hart of Michigan was asked why the nomination he floor managed had failed.
A group that to whom the Warren Court for 15 years has been anathema. Those who are offended by the advances in civil rights in this country. Republicans, and I can understand this, who feel that in November there may be a Republican elected, and let's keep that plum for our boy. And the crescendo of poison from the right-wing groups, a president whose popularity at the moment is low, who sent it up, combination of these things.
And Republican Strom Thurmond of South Carolina finally had some kind words for Fortas.
This is the finest decision that Justice Fortas has made since he has been on the Supreme Court. I suggest now that he go a step further and resign from the court for the sake of good government.
President Johnson now has three options: send up a new nomination, make a recess appointment, or let the next president have the pleasure. After this bitter defeat, however, speculation seems fruitless. Roger Mudd, CBS News, Washington.
The forgotten victim of the Fortas fight is federal Judge Homer Thornberry of Texas, the Supreme Court nominee for whom there is now no vacant seat. He declined to comment today on the development, saying it would be inappropriate.
You don't see many wild stallions anymore. No, you don't see many wild stallions anymore. And even if he did run off three of your best mares, he's one of the last of a wild and very singular breed. Come to where the flavor is. Come to Marlboro country.
George Wallace plans to name his third-party running mate tomorrow morning at a news conference in Pittsburgh. The story on that choice from CBS News correspondent Nelson Benton.
George Wallace plans to name retired Air Force General Curtis LeMay as his vice presidential running mate tomorrow at a news conference in Pittsburgh. CBS News has learned from sources close to the third-party candidate that the long period of intermittent negotiations between Wallace and the former Air Force Chief of Staff have concluded in LeMay being the Wallace choice. During earlier talks, there were reports from within the Wallace camp that General LeMay was not interested in running for vice president. There were also indications as late as last month that Wallace was being cautious about naming the man who built the U.S. Strategic Air Command because of his militaristic image. Apparently, these mutual differences have been ironed out, according to one report, as recently as a meeting Monday in Chicago between the two men. General LeMay landed in Pittsburgh late this afternoon and would make no comment. Indications are that he will campaign with Wallace for a few days and then start campaigning on his own. Nelson Benton, CBS News, Pittsburgh.
CBS will televise Wallace's news conference tomorrow live over many of these stations at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Wallace's organization today canceled a rally scheduled for New York's Shea Stadium next week and rescheduled it for October 24th in Madison Square Garden. A spokesman said the city's appeal of a court ruling making the stadium available to Wallace made it impossible to hold the rally as originally scheduled. Richard Nixon put aside campaign rhetoric today to philosophically discuss the nature of the American spirit. Addressing a small, invited crowd in an historic hall at William and Mary, the nation's second oldest college, Nixon said the American spirit always has welled up in times of trouble. And as in the past, he said, that spirit now is demanding sacrifice and ingenuity of the people. Hubert Humphrey, still campaigning in the South, where his rivals are strong, continued to strike out at both Nixon and Wallace. At one rally in Jacksonville, Florida, police had to break up a brief scuffle between Wallace supporters and some Negroes backing Humphrey. In Indiana today, a Kennedy was on the campaign trail. That story from Dan Rather.
Blonde Joan Kennedy is at age 32 the least experienced campaigner among the Kennedy women. She is in Indiana to help Democratic Senator Birch Bayh, who was in the Ted Kennedy plane crash 4 years ago. In a tough race now against young Republican Bill Ruckelshaus, Bayh feels he is being hurt by Hubert Humphrey's poor showing. Bayh seldom mentions the vice president, so Joan Kennedy talked about Humphrey only in answering questions.
Oh, well, I'm for Humphrey, and my husband, Ted Kennedy, is for Humphrey. Yes. We're for all the Democrats. I watched the vice president on television, and I think that, well, as you all know, Ted's position on Vietnam is different from the vice president's. It still is, yes. But I think that he sent a telegram to Vice President Humphrey saying that he congratulated him on the contribution he made to the campaign, and saying that he thought it was a step towards peace.
Joan Kennedy comes across before audiences as warm and sincere, with an appealing schoolgirlish nervousness. You only have to see her hands to know just how nervous. Or look behind the rostrum to see her pushing her shoes on and off as she talks. When someone asked her if she was nervous, she replied, "You bet, scared to death." Dan Rather, CBS News in Indiana.
Do you soak your dentures clean? You can brush them cleaner with Denture Cream. Look, we soaked that heavy lipstick stain, soaked it all night in a leading tablet cleanser. Even with soaking and vigorous brushing, that denture material is still stained. Now try Denture Cream, the powerful denture toothpaste. In no time, Denture Cream scrubs, brushes, polishes dentures clean, leaves your mouth toothpaste fresh. See the difference? Denture Cream outcleans your soak.
Listen to all the ways Corriga Denture Adhesive helps people with loose, false teeth.
Corriga holds so tight I can eat almost anything.
Listen.
Corriga, nothing else ever got me through the day with such confidence.
Listen.
With Corriga, my mouth feels comfortable, tastes nice and clean.
New Corriga does so much, helps you forget you're wearing false teeth.
Generally, the federal equal time broadcast law makes the news in regard to major elections, such as presidential contests. But its scope doesn't stop there, as a county tax collector's race in Florida demonstrates. A film report now by John Lawrence.
When the local NBC station cut away from the Today Show this morning, the familiar face of the local announcer was missing, so his political opponent for tax collector could get equal time.
Well, we'll find out.
Channel 7, Panama City.
WJHG-TV presents Mr. George Logue, Jr., the Republican candidate for tax collector of Bay County. This free time has been made available to Mr. Logue in response to his demand for equal time pursuant to Section 315 of the Communications Act.
Whenever a man stands up for what he considers right, he is considered a champion by some and an ingrate by others. When George Wallace stood in the doorway of the University of Alabama, he found himself in this position. Mayor Daley of Chicago discovered this during the Democrat convention. When I stood up against the television industry and its enormous power, I too found myself in this unique position. We must either stand by the law or the law will perish. So now that I have been the one to insist that the television industry also abide by the law, I am a martyr to some, an ingrate to some, but an example to the nation of the spirit and determination of a West Florida cracker.
Republican Logue, the newcomer to television, was awarded airtime equal to all the exposure of the regular anchorman, about 22 hours, including the time taken up by the studio band. Even though he never mentioned politics, Democrat Don Brookins was fired after 25 years in broadcasting because his station would have to keep giving his opponent equal exposure.
I think that the FCC's ruling is I have been caught on a technicality. I don't think that the FCC ever foresaw a situation as this arising, nor the Congress when they made the laws. So I don't think that the law was designed for that person in the industry who wants to run for public office. Now, as far as public exposure is concerned, if a person can win an election simply by appearance, then the only fair way to have an election, and if that's wrong, would be for the candidates to announce and then retire to the Okefenokee Swamp until after the election.
The FCC's equal exposure decision raises questions for future campaigns. What would the ruling be, for example, if some California candidate challenged the TV reruns of old Ronald Reagan movies? If newscaster Chet Huntley runs for public office, as expected someday, would his opponent be entitled to sit in with David Brinkley? All the ramifications of the FCC ruling are not yet clear, but the voters of Bay County, Florida will now choose a new tax collector. Either a newly emerging air personality who likens himself to George Wallace and Mayor Daley, or an out-of-work air personality who feels like he's been banished to the Okefenokee Swamp. John Lawrence, CBS News, Panama City, Florida.
A footnote to John Lawrence's report. In the case of Ronald Reagan's old movies, some California stations stopped showing them during his campaign for governor. In Vietnam, communist gunners shot down 3 helicopters loaded with wounded American troops. They're being carried away from battles south and southwest of Da Nang. The number of GIs killed in the crashes was not disclosed. The battleship New Jersey found new targets for its 16-inch gun several miles above the demilitarized zone, and they destroyed 11 North Vietnamese bunkers and a truck park. A spotter plane for the New Jersey was shot down, but the crewmen were rescued. The chief of South Vietnam's Joint General Staff said today that the Allies should carry out a partial invasion of North Vietnam to halt infiltration. The officer, General Cao Van Bien, said none of the measures tried so far has been effective in blocking the North Vietnamese. He called for the Allies to strike about 300 miles deep into the north, near Hanoi, and occupy territory where the Ho Chi Minh Trail begins. Bien emphasized that the recommendation was his own and that he was not speaking for the Saigon government.
Have you ever asked yourself,
can iron poor blood make me tired?
Yes, especially if you're a woman. You may need Geritol. The great majority of tired people don't feel that way because of iron poor blood, and Geritol won't help them, but it's a medical fact that many of the millions of people who have iron poor blood are tired and need Geritol. It could be why you're tired. Just 2 Geritol tablets contain twice the iron in a pound of calf's liver, plus 7 vitamins. Geritol iron carries strength throughout your body. So for iron-poor, tired blood, take Geritol. Feel stronger fast. This is Ralph Bellamy. Your health.
Honey, it's 3 in the morning.
I can't sleep.
When simple tension keeps you awake, take Sominex as directed for 100% safe sleep.
Take Sominex tonight and sleep safe and restful. Sleep, sleep, sleep.
Take 2 Sominex tablets and sleep.
Secretary of State Rusk was interrupted briefly by Vietnam peace demonstrators today during a major policy speech to the UN General Assembly. But he went on to restate the Johnson administration's position on the war and to denounce the invasion of Czechoslovakia. CBS News correspondent Richard C. Hottelet reports.
When Secretary Rusk said that Washington was still waiting for Hanoi's response to offers of peace in Vietnam, 9 people got up in the public gallery and started shouting. After about a minute, Rusk continued as the delegates applauded. Sternly, he addressed the Soviet Union on Czechoslovakia.
Czechoslovakia today is an occupied country. 6 weeks ago, in the middle of the night, suddenly and without warning, that small independent state was invaded by a massive army led by the Soviet Union. Thus a world which had begun to speak of a thaw in the Cold War feels once again a chill of apprehension concerning Soviet purpose. When will the Soviet Union, whose international relations are subject to the United Nations Charter, make good on its own repeated promise by removing the occupying forces from Czechoslovakia? The nations of the world will look to the Soviet Union for answers to these questions and for assurance that it is not seeking to place itself above the law of the Charter. Let us say very plainly and simply to the Soviet Union, the road to détente is the road of the Charter.
Secretary Rusk said the occupation of Czechoslovakia had sent shock waves of indignation around the world and had shaken hopes of better East-West relations. Turning to Germany, he referred to new Soviet threats and declared, "We who bear the responsibility will not tolerate the threat or use of force against West Berlin." Russia's Andrei Gromyko, who replies tomorrow, listened in stony silence. Richard C. Hottelet, CBS News, United Nations.
The Senate today held its first secret session in more than 2 years, the first since a debate on supervision of the Central Intelligence Agency. Swearing employees to silence, the Senate sat behind closed doors for 2.5 hours to discuss the anti-ballistic missile defense system. Again, the Senate resisted attempts to cut funds for starting that system. Sextuplets, 4 girls and 2 boys, were born today in Birmingham, England, to a woman treated with fertility drugs after being childless during 10 years of marriage. One of the infants, a girl, lived less than an hour. We have a film report on the story narrated by Philip Scheffler in London.
The boys' names are Ian and Roger. The girls will be called Lynn, Julie, and Susan. A 6th child, a boy, died shortly after birth. They're the first children of Sheila Thorns, who turned 30 today and who has been taking a fertility drug, and her husband Norman, a draftsman. All 6 children were born within 3 minutes by cesarean section. Each weighed between 2 and 3 pounds. They were 2 months premature. The babies were delivered this morning by a team of doctors headed by Dr. Margaret Shotton at Birmingham Hospital.
What condition are they in?
They're very good at the moment for first-day prematures of this stage, but no one of us would give an opinion as to whether they're going to survive or not yet.
When do you think you would be in a position to give an opinion? How long, a week, a month?
A week. If these 5 babies live a week, then I think we can begin to be hopeful about them.
The proud father wasn't surprised.
No, we knew it would be a multiple birth, approximately 3 at the time.
When did you first realize it was going to be more than 3?
That was around about August, I should say, when they told us that it would be at least 5 and possibly 6.
Tonight, Mrs. Thorne is fine, and her 5 children appear to be doing as well as can be expected. Philip Scheffler, CBS News, London.
The report via satellite. The group of Washington area priests who disagree with the Roman Catholic ban on artificial birth control sharply criticized Patrick Cardinal O'Boyle today for punishing many involved in the dispute. The Archbishop so far has disciplined 39 priests who publicly dissented from Pope Paul's birth control ruling. A leader of the group today called Cardinal O'Boyle's action an arbitrary, unjust, and scandalous misuse of authority and said it might be best if the 72-year-old cardinal resigned. Russia's influential literary Gazette today carried the first direct Soviet attack on the birth control encyclical. The magazine said the Catholic Church position is outdated and, because of the threat of overpopulation, should be ignored. The Chicago conference was told today that medical quacks now do a $2 billion a year business in the United States, which is more than the country spends on legitimate medical research or health education. Speakers said the problem is an international one. They said quacks are keeping right up with the times and now call the old snake oils and elixirs new laboratory discoveries. Marcel Duchamp, a major figure in the development of modern and pop art, died today at his home near Paris. He was 81. His nude descending staircase, shown here, influenced many later artists after first being exhibited in 1913. A station wagon was halted at gunpoint by New York City police today as it completed a cross-country trip from California, loaded with what they said was 664 pounds of marijuana. The car's 2 occupants, identified as Cuban nationals, were arrested. Police said today's haul would have had a market value of $5 to $6 million.
Colds can be such a bore if you allow them to be. Don't. A good cold, like a good wine, should be enjoyed. For example, sympathy at home. Excellent. Sneeze, and you get an automatic bless you. How often do you get blessed? You can miss things you want to miss, and do things you want to do. The job, come in late, leave early, or don't come in at all. You have a cold, don't you? This is Alka-Seltzer. It's as necessary to enjoy a cold as the cold itself. If you feel miserable while you're having a cold, you're not going to enjoy it. Alka-Seltzer has aspirin plus alkalizers. The aspirin for that feverish feeling, headaches, blood aches, blahs. Alkalizers for stomach upsets. Alka-Seltzer keeps you feeling as good as possible inside while looking as bad as possible outside.
St. Louis beat Detroit 4-0 today in the opening game of the World Series as Cardinal pitcher Bob Gibson set a new series record for strikeouts. Haywood Hale-Brun reports from St. Louis.
Appropriately, in this, the year of the pitcher, most fans didn't think of the World Series opener as the Cardinals against the Tigers, but as Bob Gibson against Denny McLain, with the rest of the players as obscure as a bullfighter's quadrilla.
During the season, Gibson established himself as baseball's most efficient pitcher with the lowest earned run average ever. Today, he was magnificent. United in admiration was Busch Stadium's biggest crowd ever, including Republican Julie Nixon, Democrat Eugene McCarthy, and a member of pop royalty, Frank Sinatra. McLain lasted only 5 innings, nibbled into defeat by walks, singles, and errors. But Gibson needed no more than this gnat cloud attack. In slow motion, he has the lazy power of an uncoiling dragon as he moves through the big swings of his delivery. No bullfighter ever exceeded the flourish of this fearsome right. At full speed, he has the blinding momentum of a hungry dragon going downhill. Some victims stood in frozen horror as fate flashed by. Some flailed in wild desperation at the empty air. Someone struck out in every frame. 4 in a row in the first 2 innings. Gibson made most of them look easy. Norm Cash, thrashing through slow motion, was here the 11th of the 17 10-pins, and he has all the anger and useless strength of a baffled bull as he flings aside the bat that 3 times today swished through strike 3. 5 players gave more than 1 unit to the total, and it was a long-time Tiger star who at the top of the 9th put Gibson into a record tie. The strikeout was number 3 for Al Kaline. The unhappy Cash was number 16 and was thus dragged into the books by the tiring but terrible Gibson. Willie Horton was the last flourish of the Cape, final out of the 4-0 game. This is Haywood Hale Broom in St. Louis.
Now to Eric Severide in Washington for some thoughts on this year of baseball, politics, and the Abe Fortas affair. Eric?
Big league baseball has become about as humorless as big league politics. But in baseball, while you can argue with the umpire, you can't get away with it. In politics, you can argue with the Constitution and often get away with it. It has been a week wondrous to behold. United States senators, in the name of constitutionalism as well as pure politics, have now barred Mr. Abe Fortas from the Chief Justiceship, not by a constitutional majority vote, but by the device of the filibuster. And Fortas supporters, of course, regard this as an unprecedented assault on the constitutional principle of the separation of powers. It all began with a claim that an outgoing president should not make such an appointment. That makes no more sense than the claim that an outgoing senator should not vote on far-reaching legislation, and as a rule of thumb, would make hash of presidential powers, whether exercised by Democratic or Republican presidents. It would be a denial of the clear meaning of the Constitution. For a good many leaders, apparently, as well as for the unschooled, the Constitution permits what they happen to like, prohibits what they happen to dislike. One of the more wondrous examples is Alabama's George Wallace, who cries constitutionalism every day, but who put his wife into the governorship while continuing to run the state himself, an implicit, if not explicit, violation of his state constitution. The real meaning of constitutionalism is not the only casualty of this political season. Reason itself is bruised every day. Each of the three candidates implies that as president he would drastically reduce crime, even though crime is essentially a local problem, governors having more authority in the matter than presidents. And criminals are no respecters of political parties. The facts, which have no significance at all, save to illustrate the point, are that the 4 states with more than 2,000 serious crimes per year per 100,000 people are all run by Republican governors. And in murder and manslaughter taken separately, Mr. Wallace's state of Alabama leads the nation. Humorless politics can be dangerous politics, if only because of the inevitable rude awakenings. Candidate Nixon tells us he will sweep the streets of Washington clear of prowlers and muggers. Candidate Humphrey tells us he will put an end to poverty in America. He will do in 4 to 8 years, in other words, what centuries of human effort could not do. It must have been in the middle of a political campaign that a British statesman of long ago remarked, "Between craft and credulity, the voice of reason is stifled." Walter?
And that's the way it is. Wednesday, October 2nd, 1968. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
Every day, all over America, men bring flowers home to their wives. That is, some men do. Excuse me, sir, when was the last time you gave your wife flowers?
Her birthday. She loves flowers, so every year I give them on her birthday. It makes her happy.
Thank you, sir. When was the last time you sent your wife flowers?
About 4 weeks ago.
What was the occasion?
Oh, just for the heck of it.
When was the last time you received flowers?
Oh, I think a couple months ago.
Who did you get them from?
My fiancé.
Your fiancé, does he send you flowers very often?
Not often enough.
Pardon me, sir, how often do you send flowers?
Sorry, haven't got time.
When was the last time you sent your wife flowers?
Oh, about 3 months ago.
When was the last time she cooked your favorite meal?
About 3 months ago.
Do you bring home flowers very often?
Oh, often as I can.
If it's been a while since you brought her flowers, see your FTD florist. He takes your thought and does more with it.
Direct from our newsroom in New York, in color, this has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. Mike Connor's television singing day.